Good morning. Today is July the 10th. Pastor Gene, I'm moving today. A little bit of personal business, but I'm moving today. Did you know that?
Good luck.
It's a busy day for me, but I'm here. We're all here. Today is Monday, July the 10th, and we got a big one for you today. We got a lot of different topics to talk about. Affirmative action, veganism, that is plant-based. And what is a woman again? None of these three are related, but we're going to be talking about those three topics. Do you feel like anything's missing today?
Chunsak.
Yeah, a big man named Chunsak is missing today. And so we are missing Chunsak today, and I'm very sad about that, but I'm sure it's for a good reason. But today we have a lot of things to talk about. You are listening to the Dear Church podcast. Welcome to the Dear Church podcast, where we exist to fill your ears and your minds with the study of God to see the world as disciples of Christ. My name is Sam Yang, and we have with us Pastor Eugene, and we don't have with us Junsa again. But today, Pastor Eugene, it's a big day. Again, I'm moving today, so happy move to me.
Where are you moving to?
So everyone knows where I live right now because in previous podcasts, both you and Chunsuk have mentioned my address down to the apartment number.
57D Cambridge?
Yes. We are no longer there. 57D Cambridge Terrace in Hackensack, New Jersey. We are no longer there. So we just say that freely now. But yeah, I'm moving somewhere else, up north. But speaking of north, we are going to be talking about a lot of different things today. Pastor Gene, this past WWE, you talked about what is a woman. So today we're going to be talking about what is a woman again. What is a woman again? And what is a woman again? Also because we had a What is a Woman podcast episode prior. So you could take a listen to that if you would wish, if you desire. Pastor Gene, you did the What is a Woman talk during our previous WWE. And, you know, I loved it. 10 out of 10. Highly recommend. So if you'd like to listen to that recording, you could always email us at podcast@cgsnj.org.
No, we're putting it up on the stream.
Oh, it is going up on our own
CGS app.
Wow.
Stream. Yeah,
this is
buddy.
2023, everybody. We have stuff like this. So on our app, we will have our own stream for the WWE talks. And so you could head over there and check those out. They are delightful, delectable. They're great. But today, we are going to be doing some follow-up questions on that talk that you gave on this past Wednesday. This past Wednesday, you talked about a woman being a zer, which means helper in the Hebrew. And I think some people maybe who have not heard this word before, or maybe even heard your sermon, the 1 Corinthians series, or even our previous podcast, may have some questions about what this means, a zer. What does this mean, and what does this look like practically?
Yeah, it's important that, when we go over, let's say, the role of a woman, we don't get it confused with the biblical understanding or definition. You don't get it confused with cultural expressions. And so I've seen two extremes where people have said cultural expressions are what women are. So, I don't know, making a sandwich or something like that as a joke. And so
why did that become a thing, by the way?
To make, I don't know. Before we get into that,
yeah,
there's the cultural expressions, and then there's the biblical standard, meaning this is what God had ordered, ordained. This is the purpose of his creation to glorify him. And we know that from Genesis chapter 127, it is so that both men and women in their roles will reflect the glory of God and the character of God. So women also reflect the glory of God. And in what way? In the order that God has given them. Now, there is a huge rebellion against that order. And that rebellion starts from, I believe, or goes down to even, we could take it both ways, to this idea that the woman is the helper of a man. Because that sounds low. That sounds, demeaning.
It does, yeah.
So what does society say about a helper is, okay, that's fine, we could go with that. But what does the Bible say about a helper? I think is more important. And so when the Bible talks about an azer, which is the Hebrew word that's translated as helper, it talks mainly giving this attribute of help or helper to God when they use this. And so there were different aspects that I talked about on Wednesday, these different characteristics of even helper or help that we went over in the Old Testament when the Hebrew word azer was used. And I do think there is a broad application to helper, but helper, what it does is, and I thought it was implied, but I could just say it overtly here. I thought it would implicate or kind of make obvious an object. When you're a helper, there's an object that you're helping, right?
Yeah.
You're not helping yourself.
Yeah.
And so what is the object of your help? And so when the Israelites call on to God and call out to God for help and saying, Lord, be my azer, who's the object of his help? We are. And so when we're saying, who is the woman to help? It is the man. And then it's so basic, but even that, I'm telling you, is challenged. And so it's challenged to the degree where people say, you know what, I don't like it. I think it's part of the curse. But, the argument is it's not part of the curse. This azer was given to the woman pre-fall. So it's pre-lapsarian to understand that azer is given to a woman.
Right.
And so when we understand things like that, that's where Paul would get his doctrine. He would pull it from Adam and Eve in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 12. He pulls it from Adam and Eve in 1 Corinthians chapter 14. He pulls it from Adam and Eve when we were talking about 1 Corinthians 11, who's the glory of man? Woman is.
Yeah.
And so what does that even mean? So I hope that we could get into that, but I did want to get into just that first portion, get that basic foundation in. Helper denotes an object. And so a woman was created to help the man.
People might think the helper is the lower. And I know that you just talked about how God is our helper, and obviously he's not lower than we are. But to someone that may continue to think that way, like, I'm a helper, I'm not the main, right? I want to be the object. I'm not the main. I'm just a helper. It's condescending. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I don't think helper means maid. If it was, it would have been like slave. Yeah. That's not what God says.
Yeah.
And God is never our slave. That's insane. So if anything, if you just took azer without the context of men and women, you would have understood. So if woman was never called an azer, then you would have understood azer as a very high title. It's a lofty title because you gave it to God, right? And help is when you're in trouble. So who can help somebody when, let's say, I can't, lift a box?
Okay.
If someone comes and helps me, that means they have the strength that I don't have. So by definition, help means you have something to whatever capacity that the other person doesn't have, which is the object of your help, right?
Okay.
And so to say that person is lower, what do you mean by that? Are you saying that these are things that you didn't want to take care of, and so you just want to give these menial tasks to a maid? That's what a woman is.
Yeah.
Then is that how you see God when God is referred to as azer? I think that no one would say that. I think no one in the right mind would say that. And so if women weren't in that, defining role of azer, and we just saw azer outside of that, that's how you would see it. This really lofty, high, and fearsome title for God. Now, if you only saw that and then brought in women after, perhaps someone might even go even too far and say that, see, women are better than men because they have the strength that men don't have. And that people have come up to that kind of, conclusion, obviously wrong, because you would have to read Genesis chapter 1, where men and women were created in the image of God. You would have to even go to Galatians 3:28, which has been misinterpreted by the egalitarians. We get it, but it does have its uses. When it says there's no master slave, there's no man and woman. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so what does that mean? That means exactly what it says in 1 Peter chapter 3, that we are co-heirs, or women are men's co-heirs, or wives are husbands' co-heirs, so much to the fact that if you don't treat them like that, you're going against God's order, God's plan, God's will, and your prayers will be hindered. So that's a condition. So if you don't treat your wives like they are co-heirs because they are, and you treat them somehow lower or inferior, your prayers are hindered. So that condition is pretty scary. I would probably think that then Christianity and the Bible really have a high view of women. In fact, if we go back again and see not just the title of Azer, but just go back to this theology, this philosophy that the Bible is teaching, which is theology. But if men and women are created in the image of God, then both men and women are to display the glory of God, display the character, or reflect the character of God. Then what character are women supposed to display? And if it's given to the woman as Azer, isn't that a character of God that women are to display? So when women are rebelling against their call or the order to be an Azer to their man, what are they rebelling against? They're not rebelling only against the man. I hope people understand that. When you say you want to be egalitarian and then, women can be anything they want, I think the woman can be anything they want. We literally see that in the world today. Women can literally do anything that they want. But I don't think that's the question people should be asking is, should they do anything they want? And the answer to the should is obviously no, because we have been given distinct roles. Now, I did want to, again, stress the difference between cultural expression and biblical mandate. We don't want to confuse the two. And so what are the biblical mandates of being an Azer? What kind of characteristics are women supposed to show? Those are all the things that we should focus on. And then it gets displayed in the culture, because culture is not, some one-off. From theology, from your principles, from your philosophy, from your understanding of reality, come forth culture. And so we don't work backwards. We definitely don't want to work backwards on this podcast. So we don't want to say women should be wearing dresses because that's who women are. And that's why this confusion of men now wearing dresses are like, oh, they're trying to be women. Why do we think that? What's the core reason why we think it's wrong? Is it simply the dress, or is it something that is beyond, or that precedes the dress?
Yeah.
That is underlying when we say the word dress. And so we want to get to the underlying portion. And then, the cultural expressions will make sense because we live in, the United States of America. And then there are certain cultural expressions that we have. Some are good, some are bad. And this is a sidebar. This also shows us that not every cultural expression is good. And some cultural expressions are superior than others. We live in a world where we are taught that every single cultural expression is equal. Not true. Not true. What's the standard? Why is it equal? Is it prosperity? Then it's not equal, obviously, because different cultures have different levels of prosperity. Then what makes it equal? Ideology makes it equal, not actual outcome. And so we don't want to go through simply merit, or we don't want to go to simply ideology. We want to go to what God has ordered. And when we see that what God has ordered leads to expression, we measure the expression with what God has ordered. And I think there are better ways to express it and then others. And so we definitely want to go into maybe some of that specific expression here, but I didn't go into that on Wednesday. I wanted to lay out the groundwork. And obviously this one is more like part 2 of what is a woman again.
Follow-up.
Yeah.
Follow-up. So I think some people might be curious. So I understand why, or I understand what an Azer is. I understand that that's what God has called me to be as a woman. But 2 questions. What does that look like today? So what does it mean then to be a helper today? And number 2, if I'm not married, how can I be an Azer? What does that even look like?
Yeah, I think so. There are deep ramifications for understanding what a woman is. Obviously, if you don't, I think I said it. Maybe I didn't say it. Maybe I just said it in our question portion. But I said, when you attack a man and you attack what manhood is, what gets affected? Womanhood. And when you attack a woman and womanhood gets affected, what gets affected as a result? Everything else, honestly. because everything else flows out from woman. Every human being is born of a woman, so everything is going to be affected. And so I think that's my philosophical take on it, obviously, but I really believe that's true. Men were there to protect their women and families, and then when they don't, who gets affected? The women and their families gets, and then the women and families make up the world. And so we see the world changing in a bad way. And so that's why people are up in arms, like, especially those that consider themselves conservative, like, what do we do now? What do we do now? All these things are happening. So then we listen to other people who, again, address the cultural expressions, but they're not really going to the core. And, there are really popular guys out there that are doing that are getting very famous over it on TikTok or Instagram. I can only think of one right now, but there are a bunch, like Andrew Tate, and there's a bunch of guys out there. But if you listen, I want you to listen carefully. They address the cultural expression. They don't address the essence of what is a woman. What cannot be answered by expression, because then that can always get challenged. So if you say women always have to wear a dress, that's crazy. You know what I mean? Then I'm going to go to every single culture and say you are inferior or superior depending on this expression, which is not, a standard. It's an expression.
Right.
So when you make an expression a standard, you always run into problems. And so we are in places like that. I'm kind of skipping on the question you originally asked because I went on that tangent.
No, it's okay.
What was the question?
It's
how do we see it? Yeah.
Practically.
Excuse me. Let's just take one, for example. Is that okay? Can we just take one?
Yes.
All right. We could go to the Old Testament, but let's go to the New. I think, we've been on the Old Testament a lot. So let's try the New Testament this time, and let's go to 1 Timothy chapter 2. And I do believe that 1 Timothy chapter 2, especially starting from, is it verse 12? It really gets into that.
This is 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 8 to 15. I desire then that in every place the men should pray, lifting holy hands without anger or quarreling. Likewise, also that women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel, with modesty and self-control, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly attire, but with what is proper for women who profess godliness with good works. Let a woman learn quietly with all submissiveness. I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man. Rather, she is to remain quiet. For Adam was formed first, then Eve, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. Yet she will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith and love and holiness with self-control. This is a tough one.
Yeah, 15.
A lot of stuff.
I mean, we talked a little bit about it.
We have definitely.
Podcast, yeah. But let's go with going back to what does it mean to be a helper? What does it mean to be a woman, right? The essence of helping. And so one of the things that we see here, and now this is where Paul goes into expression, but he gets it from the baseline of what a woman is, okay? That baseline is not just the adorning. The adorning is an expression that we can understand throughout culture, okay?
Yeah.
So the specific adornings, we could say this is an expression, but the adorning is from this very, very foundational understanding of what a woman is. And what a woman is has to do with beauty, 100%. So all throughout cultures, there is this understanding that women are to be beautiful. And even when you're a kid, we did that. This obviously is anecdotal, but I would say what cultural expression doesn't have this? But I'm telling you, it stems from our being of who we are, essentially. Essentially meaning the essence. What is a woman? And so when Paul talks about beauty, we could have gone to Proverbs 31, obviously, but that's a very popular one. But I thought we can go to this one. And so what are they supposed to be? How should they adorn themselves? How should they be beautiful? And so cultural expressions understand this very basic notion that women are to be beautiful, but not in the way that the world says it, because that has now been twisted. And now that if you read the beginning portion of chapter 2, it's about the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's about being a witness to the Gentiles. And if that's the case, then how should we witness? Meaning, how should we exemplify the glory of God? How should we reflect the character of God as a woman? And then he says it straight up. He says, in respectable apparel, modesty, self-control, not with the cultural expressions that they had that day, right? So we can say, is that a cultural expression? No, 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 no. He's going back to what the Bible is saying. The essence of what is a woman is they should adorn themselves with the beauty that God has commanded them to be. He wants them to be beautiful in the way that he has designed them to be, ordered them to be, has ordained them to be, and all of that stuff, not in the way that the world does it. Now, there are expressions that, the world will see as, oh, this woman is beautiful. But, it's really genius here, the way he's doing it. He's contrasting these two things where instead of adorning yourselves with these physical things like gold to make yourself shine and make yourself stand out, how should you stand out? And then it goes to this understanding. If we just took that one verse and you meditated on it, you realize that women are to be brilliant, like shine. And then you go back to 1 Corinthians 11. Yeah, they are the glory of man. They are glory shines, right? And so all these things start to tie in together. Remember, I'm not going to cultural expression. We're going to what the essence is, and then the expression comes out, because expression has to come out if you understand the foundation. Just like if you understand, let's say, the alphabet, you're just going to start putting things together into words, right? And so words come out because you know the alphabet. And so one of those things that we understand is this foundational thing is showing us that women are to be beautiful. They are to be brilliant in beauty because that's how God designed them to be. And the way that they show that beauty is not in this expression that we saw in Ephesus and Asia Minor that he's writing to Timothy about. It's to be like this. It's to be respectable apparel, modesty, self-control. These things, these qualities and characteristics should be the things that really shine from your life. He says it to women, not to men. And so when women or men, whoever, are criticizing, they're like, well, can men wear whatever they want? It's like, obviously, no. But there's a reason why it's specifically given to women and why men are given a different kind of order. That makes sense?
So that's how a woman would fulfill her role to Azer, to be the helper.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people are like, well, how can I be an Azer if I'm not married yet?
Right.
All I hear is I need to prepare myself to eventually be one. That's fine. But what if you never get married? Then you prepare for nothing. Because marriage to a man isn't the ultimate. It's a big step, but it's not the ultimate. The ultimate is marriage to Jesus Christ. And so it's shown by the way we express it in different areas of our lives. Yes, in the household. That's one huge one. It's, what we talked about. It is the building block of society. It is the core institution of all of the world is the family. So that's why it's so big that a wife understand this. But even if you were called to be single, which is a rare, very beautiful, but very rare gift, and then what should we do? And I don't want to get into it too much, but too many single people, because they've pushed back their marriage age for so long, think maybe their calling is to be single. And I would say, no, that's not how it works. And I don't like that kind of mentality. It's normative to get married unless you have a very special calling from God. That means that he will instill within you the gift, and then that desire is taken away from you or things like that. I don't think most people are. I would say 99.9% of the people are called to get married. And it can be situational. Like in Corinth, I believe it was situational because there was going to be a very hard time coming. Paul knew that. And he put that heart in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Anyway, without getting too much into that, you are in submission to other things too. And so as a woman and as a man, but let's just keep it as a woman, you are still in submission to your elders, are you not? And so this is one way you can continue to show the brilliance of God's glory in your life, is to continue to follow what 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 9 and on says, right? That's how you do it. And that's why it goes all the way to even 12. Don't be an elder. That's what 12 is. And so you can really shine that glory by not doing that and usurping the role of elders, but also by showing the beauty that God has instilled you with. That's just one. We're just talking about one verse. Yeah. That's okay. We could go on other verses too later. But, and there are other places. So one of the things that I do find intriguing and kind of disappointing, I should say, is that when people have an issue with submitting to their husbands and saying, I don't want to submit to my husband, I don't want to submit to no man, that's kind of crazy because you submit to somebody at all times. If you have a boss, you submit. Even if you're the CEO, what are you submitting to? You're submitting to, you know,
The
economic
company.
law.
Oh, yeah.
Even if you're the owner of the company, you're submitting to the truths, the physics of
Right.
finances, meaning supply, demand, chains, and all these things, like this understanding of, return on investment, all the things that you learn in economics 101 and so on. You're submitting to these laws because these laws are good, right?
Mhm.
And they're the ones that will help you thrive. If you don't submit to those laws, you're not going to survive.
Mhm.
You'll go bankrupt in no time. And so you want to submit to the laws that God has ordained. And so that's that. So you do. Most people have a boss. You submit to the boss. There's always someone above you. There's an authority figure above you, and so you submit to them. So we're always submitting to a higher authority figure. Even if we're in the state, we have governors, we have the president of the United States, right?
Yeah.
We have people in the municipalities that have authority over us, charge over us, right? Things like that. But the biggest qualm people have is, I don't want to submit to my husband's. That's the issue. Why is it that you don't have a problem with anything else? And when it comes to this, you seem to have such a big problem because it's hitting the core institution of our society. That rebellion goes down to the very core. And so that's what we're facing. We're facing the destruction and, just the degradation of the core institution of the entire world and society because women won't submit to their husbands anymore. And this is what Paul is saying. This is something that you ought to do because if God has ordered it, that's how flourishing comes. That's how fruitfulness comes. That's how prosperity comes, not outside of what God has ordained.
I think that's the biggest problem that people have with the Bible's teaching on the different roles that men and women have. And especially with complementarianism, that's one of the biggest things issues that people have is, why are women to submit themselves to men? And I think some of the things that I've heard in response to this is they've actually almost redefined the word submit to mean something different than it actually means. Even so, this is from Oxford Languages. Submit means to accept or yield to a superior force or to the authority or will of another person. But I've heard of people change this definition to mean something else. And so I guess since you brought up submission, which is actually what we're going to talk about next, what does it mean to submit to anyone, to anything, and especially to your husband? And what are the biggest issues that you see happening today with submission?
Yeah, I think there are different ways to tackle it. And that's exactly what we do in our women's ministries. There are pillars of submission that we go through in the women's ministry. So like when we first did it, some of the newer ladies were surprised. It's like, that's a lot of submission here.
Yeah.
But it is in reflection of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ and how he submitted himself to the Father's will. And that even went to submitting in the sense where he took off his outer cloak, outer garment, tied it around his waist, and washed the feet of the disciples. That's something that you should have learned, maybe even from Sunday school when you were a kid, that even the slaves didn't do it. The slave of the slave used to do that because it was so, such a lowly act. And yet Jesus Christ was giving us an example of what submission is. And yet, is Jesus Christ inferior to us? Who would ever say that?
No.
And even non-Christians don't say that. I don't think anybody would dare say that. And so submission is something that we saw Jesus Christ do while he was here on this earth. It has to do with will. It has to do with the good of others. It has to do with all these other things. And even if we went to Ephesians chapter 5, right before, I think it's verse 22, but right before it says, wives, submit to your husbands, it talks about how we got to submit to each other because it's talking about the church before. And so we have to submit to each other. What does that mean? Right?
Yeah.
How do we submit to each other? And I think one easy way or a very, very broad way to define that is you look for the good in the other person before your own. And I think that's one way we can define it. It looks different. Submission looks different within different spheres of industry. So submission will look different from wife to a husband, to an employee to an employer, to a citizen to its government leader. Submission looks different there, right? But I would say submission in our broad sense, in the church sense, is to look for the good in others, or to not look for the good in others, to want or do what is good for the other person. And so in a husband and wife setting, there is then this understanding that there is one will in the house. And whose will is that?
The husband.
And I think that's really difficult for a lot of people to say, to understand.
Yeah.
Because what is the danger then? If it's the husband's will that needs to be carried out in the family, what is the danger?
The danger is the husband can be a despot.
Yeah, he could exasperate the wife, which is exactly going against what Paul is saying. Paul is saying, do not exasperate your wives. And so that is, again, going against the Bible. So because of the danger, and also because of what's forbidden in the Bible, and because people's tendency to sin, maybe some women are like, well, I don't want that to ever happen to me, because that would demean the person out of me, right? And that is, and so that's a fear that people have. You know, what if this person takes advantage of me?
Yeah.
Am I still called to submit to them? And so God doesn't say that. God doesn't say like, well, he might take advantage of you. If because of that, don't submit. Then God doesn't say that. He says submit. And if the other person takes advantage of that, he's going to be in big trouble. You know, he's going to suffer the consequences. There's punishment for the guilty, but it doesn't mean that we do not do what God has. It's the truth for any law. You can be afraid of something, but it doesn't mean that the law isn't true or it exists even, right?
But where's the line though? You know, you could say this and Pastor Gene, you're a man of God. You know, someone could say, Sam, you're a man of God. Thank you so much. But what if my husband is irresponsible? What if my husband is maybe even borderline abusive? How am I still called to submit to him? Don't I have to think about myself and my safety?
Yeah. I mean, people have done it the other way in history, where if a woman was not all the submissive in the way that the man wanted, like completely, even if it was abusive, he could have her killed. You know, look at Muslim countries now.
Right. Yeah.
The extreme portions of these countries where they want to exact Sharia law. Right?
Yeah.
They'll have women dragged outside and, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even today, right?
Yeah. And so those extremes can go both ways, is my point. Because of these extremes, people are very afraid and they just want to give a blanket answer. And that's something that I have said in the past that I don't want to do. Number one is you need to make sure that you understand the gospel. Before you understand what it means to be a woman, I hope that you understand who you are in Jesus Christ. If you understand who you are in Jesus Christ, then you take on the gift of being a woman with joy, with gratitude, with thanksgiving, in worship. And then you fulfill that duty because you know what you are doing is reflecting the glory of God, which is just a beautiful, beautiful thing. I would say the same for a man, but in the ways a man has been given to fulfill his roles and duties, not to, not to be a coward, but to be brave and to uphold the duties that God has given a man with joy, with that kind of both characteristics that I mentioned for men and women. And so because of people's fear of, abuse, of these terrible things that have happened in the past, we don't want to. What's the other option? The other option is exactly what we're seeing in egalitarian societies. It's the rejection of God's law. Because if you can reject this, you can reject other things. You know what I mean? And so we did go over this in a podcast in the past, but people, like specific people who advocated for women becoming ordained in the PCUSA would go up like 20 years later in the General Assembly, say we have to ordain homosexuals because we already ordained women. And to them, it was just that sliding scale. Obviously, now we're ready for that. And so people are like, what? How do we get from here to here? It is. It is. Once you get rid of any kind of norm in the Bible, I don't care what your reasoning is. Once you get rid of that order, what's it, to you to take away another piece of an order from God? And so you can take that anyway, anything you want. And so why stop here at the gender thing? Because it's outdated. There are so many things that you could say are outdated then. And so, I think people maybe don't think this through, that when they take the gender portion of what scripture says is not what it's saying, and they come up with some convoluted way of describing Kalef or whatever head means, right? And then you write books on that. And then I have to read that for class, because I did have to read stuff like that for class. Yeah. And then you see that people have to go through so many hoops and so many, I don't know, just rationalizations to come to where they are, where they eventually will say, well, the Bible is true and the Bible doesn't mean what it says. You can't come to those two same conclusions in the same space and think you're logical or coherent. But here we are today, where people are saying both those things. Oh, the Bible is true, but the Bible's not true when it comes to women roles.
Yeah, that's tough. I think one of the biggest things that I've seen people think about is when it comes to especially the question of women's roles, people just automatically just say, well, that's an ancient book. It was back in that time. That was a cultural thing. We as a human people, we have come further than that. And then they always bring up slavery, right? Look what the Bible says about slavery. Look where we're here now. And these are all topics that we've actually talked about on the previous podcast. So if you have these questions, make sure to take a listen to that podcast. We'll have the episode number in our description. And if you still have more questions on this topic after listening to that podcast episode, you could always email us at podcast@cjsnj.org. But Pastor Eugene, you brought up reactions to past crimes or reaction to past extremes or past abuses. And I wanted to just quickly talk about affirmative action, because that's kind of what it is. A lot of people have been rallying and have been disagreeing with the Supreme Court's decision. And, the big question is, isn't affirmative action a good thing, right? Wasn't this the government's act to correcting the mistake that they had made in the past, recognizing the years of segregation and discrimination against women and people of color? And actually, the American Civil Liberties Union writes this about affirmative action. They write, affirmative action helps ensure equal access to opportunities and brings our nation closer to the ideal of giving everyone a fair chance. And so it's only fair for us to have affirmative action, because if we didn't have it, people of color, women, wouldn't be able to get into the jobs, the universities, the programs that they should be getting into, just simply because of their gender or because of their color. So isn't this a good thing? Aren't we trying to help people get back on their feet? What's so wrong about affirmative action, especially because that's what you had expressed last week when we just briefly talked about it?
Yeah, I guess we could go two ways. So let me go with one, and then a more basic foundational way. But let's look at what people are saying is the outcome. The outcome that has been touted that this program will bring has not brought it. It hasn't been brought.
No.
And so affirmative action has not made Black graduation rates better. Mm-hmm. Maybe acceptance rates better, but the Black dropout rate is much higher. They can't keep up in these schools. So now what are these schools doing? They are actually saying that these classes are now racist. Like biology is racist because Black people can't pass it. If you can only look at outcome or the equality of outcome, and you call that equity for whatever reason, if you only look at the equality of outcome, what happens is that all the things prior gets thrown by the wasteland.
Yeah.
It just wayside. It's just gone. And what people don't realize is this is actually hurting the Black community. If you want to call, if you just want to stick with that kind of terminology, I just think that Americans are Americans, and so there are so many things that you lose out. And if you just describe a person by simply the color of their skin, you get rid of like a bunch of other factors, like their socioeconomic factor, where they grew up, what kind of heritage they had here. Like, I think I said this in last week's podcast, but how can you compare an African American who grew up here for, let's say, 7 generations and a Nigerian immigrant?
Yeah.
You can't compare those two.
No.
They're very different. And yet we just put them into one box because
Right.
I think that's more racist. You're
Right.
just simply putting skin above every other quality and characteristics about the individual. And so I think that's a huge disservice we have done to so many Americans and people, citizens, where we have just said, by the color of your skin, we're just going to give you this or that, characteristic. We're just going to lump you in here. And that actually has hurt people. Less people are graduating from these elite institutions. They can't pass the classes, so they have to make the classes dumber. So what do you want, a doctor who can't pass Orgo, like 101? You want a doctor who doesn't understand basic biology or chemistry? Is that what you want? Just because you need that equality of outcome? Like, is that the kind of doctor you want? Obviously,
No.
you don't. And there are so many other aspects to it. Like Jason C. Riley wrote a book called "Please Stop Helping Us." It's a very small book. It was written like over 10 years ago, I think. But it's basically saying, like, you trying to help us with your government programs have actually hurt the Black community. He's not a conservative. He's actually a liberal. And yet even liberals understand that this is a terrible, terrible thing that you have done. Now, why are people in an uproar when there's so many basic facts saying this has actually harmed people rather than help them? Because we haven't even gone to when you take a seat that you don't belong, you take it from someone else because there's limited number of seats, right?
Right.
So there actually is a cost to it. Whose seat are you taking, And so I've heard people say things like, well, it's okay if, Asian Americans get their seat taken for the sake of Black people. What if it's just wasted and both people suffer? Would you want that?
Right.
And so that's the picture that we're seeing. And so I don't think it happens at that elite institutional level. I think it happens before. It happens in your upbringing. It happens in your schooling before you even get to, let's say, the SATs. And that's why we have places like Harvard and Columbia who are saying that they won't even look at your SATs anymore.
They don't anymore. Yeah, they don't.
Because the disparity is so great now.
Yep.
It's not like 100, 200 point difference. It's like a 400, 500 point difference between these Black applicants and, let's say, the top Asian applicant. And then we still need to fill in our seats of Black applicants because, diversity is our strength, or whatever nonsense you want to say about that.
Yeah.
And so who have you been harming throughout the generations, throughout the years that you've had this program? It can be argued that it helped for, a season and now it's time to move on. I think that's what some of the Supreme Court justices have argued. I am not fully there. I think if something is unconstitutional, it's for a reason. And if it's going against, let's say, the natural law of things, then you can't use it. If you use it, you're actually doing more harm than good. And just because you want an equality of outcomes, you're going to sacrifice, you are going to literally put at risk every other thing that is good to the wayside. You know what I mean? And so I think it's a great harm we've done to our institutions, our education systems, people just not teaching math anymore because, let's say, people aren't passing trigonometry even on an equal level between all races. Then obviously it must be racist because racism equals a disparity of outcome, apparently, according to like Ibram X. Kendi and people like that. And if that's the case, then trigonometry must be racist. Who's building our bridges now? Who's going to be an engineer now? Who's going to do all these things that we need basic math for? We're in trouble.
It's
Society's in trouble, right?
Yeah.
And it stems from this, ideology that, we must have an equality of outcome no matter what, because that is the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is not equality of outcome. The ultimate goal should be equity in the biblical sense. It should be justice. There should be an equal weight distribution, meaning if 5 pounds is 5 pounds for you, 5 pounds should be 5 pounds for a Black person or a Hispanic person or a white person or another Asian person. 5 pounds should be 5 pounds. Unequal weights and measures really, really disturbs God. He hates that. It says that in Proverbs, doesn't it? And so, why are we putting unequal weights and measures when it comes to the intellect?
Yeah.
That's wrong. Biblically, that is a wrong stand to take. And so, I can't stand behind affirmative action. If you really wanted to help somebody, whoever it is, whatever color they are, whatever socioeconomic status they have, or whatever kind of neighborhood they grew up in, you would teach them how to use the 5 pound weight correctly. You wouldn't say, for you, I'm going to give you a 2.5 pound weight. That hurts the person. Teach them how to use the 5 pound weight correctly. And if you can't do that, then don't change the 5 pound weight. Figure out some other way to teach them. That's what I would probably have to say about that.
So, I mean, before you said, people of different colors are getting into these universities because, they're diversity admissions. And then you said that, but they can't keep up. They can't keep up with Orgo. They can't keep up with calculus and all these different classes because they didn't get in by merit. They got in because of their skin color. Then what would be the solution? And I think you just kind of touched on it here where you teach them how to use the 5 pound weight, but where does this go back to them? Does this go back to elementary school? What does this go back to? What is the solution then here? Because I think affirmative action, like you said, was to equalize the outcome. So then if that's not the key, if that's not the answer, then what are we supposed to be doing?
If you want to go all the way back to the very foundational cornerstone of human society now in 2023, it has to be Jesus Christ. It has to be. And if people don't want to believe in Jesus Christ, then what you want to do is continue to promote the good values. Remember how we are a light to the Gentiles in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 9, right? How are you a light to the Gentiles? By exemplifying what real beauty is, not adornment with gold and jewelries like the other people did, but with, like 1 Peter chapter 3 also talks about that, how you're supposed to adorn yourself with quietness and that kind of humility. And that is actual beauty. And then you show the world that, and you see that that's actually true. It's true that that's actual beauty and it affects the world. So again, Jesus Christ is the ultimate foundation. And if people don't believe in Jesus Christ, then, for society to run, it's as close as you can get, obviously. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you do promote the values and the characteristics and the merits that the Bible teaches. That means, don't use unequal measures. That's a very basic in the Bible. It doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not a Christian. That's the truth, right? And so there are truths that the Bible teaches that will, not let you go up in a puff of smoke, but actually will, be decent for you, which is like, have a family. Understand the roles of a husband and a wife. Understand what parents are supposed to do for their children. Stop upturning what was very basic in the Judeo-Christian world that made this country as great as it was. And I say it in past tense. The country was greater than it is now. Was greater than it is now, obviously.
Right.
We are on a steep decline and it's going down fast. And it's a very sad sight to see, but it's because, number one, we've lost sight of who God is, who right now would fight and say, this is for God and country. I don't even know if they would say country because we lost God. People hate this country, which is, what? What are you doing here? They just hate this country because they also hate God. They don't even know what we're fighting for. I think if people fought, it would just be for me or something like that. Then why would you fight? Because you might die. Let other people fight, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Send drones in. Why do I have to fight? That's what people will think. And you become so weak in the meantime because your thinking is weak. But there are other principles. And like you said, elementary school is great too. I would go even back further is my point. I'll go back further and instill within our society the goodness of traditional family values, of having a father and a mother in the home. Get rid of all these other things that are trying to usurp those traditional values because that's how God designed the world, by having a man and woman come together, a man cleaving to his wife, and then children coming out as a fruit from that kind of love a man has for his wife. And so those are very basic things that the whole world should understand is a good thing. Same thing as saying 5 pounds is 5 pounds. That's what it is. It's just a law. And so if people understand that, that's only to their benefit. It's not to their detriment. And if they understand that benefit, hopefully that also leads them to understand that Christians have a really good value system. And I know a ton of conservatives that are not Christian who still believe that Christians have a very good value system. And we didn't pull it out from our butts. We didn't just think this up. This has been passed down from generation to generation to generation to where we are now. So I hope that makes sense. There's a reason why people call themselves conservative, because there are values that are in place that are good, like intrinsically good. Like having a mother and a father growing up is an intrinsic good. Not having that is going to hurt you 100%. Because if something is an intrinsic good and you don't have that in your life, then you're going to, be at a loss that's in some level.
I think it's just a good reminder. And the reason why I brought this up is because a lot of people are on Instagram. And if you look on Instagram, there's many, many, many opinions out there. And a lot of people have been posting, posts and comments that are in favor of affirmative action. And I just wanted to see and kind of hear your thoughts on how Christians should be viewing this, or what the Bible even says about affirmative action. I think that was very, very helpful for us.
Yeah, I think many Christians are given into this whole, sympathy doctrine, be nice doctrine. And being nice is, again, not a fruit of the Spirit. Gentleness, self-control, they are all there. But I don't think that's the nice that we mean. And so, while we can have sympathy, while we are to sympathize with other people's needs, we can't make 5 pounds 2.5 pounds. We can't forego justice. When you forego justice into thinking that's sympathy, that's not mercy anymore. It's actually injustice. There's a difference between injustice and mercy. And I hope Christians really understand it. And, I don't want to get too much into it, but I hope that you can think deeply on the difference between the two and why, injustice is what God rages against. Mercy is something that he loves.
I think I really like that example of the 5 pounds, because if I think about it, when I'm lifting with Chunseok and I have to lower the weights for him, it doesn't help him. It doesn't help him. As a matter of fact, it weakens him. What I should be doing as a brother is helping him to lift the weights that I'm lifting so that he could be just as strong as me. And not just saying, hey, it's okay. You can do the little weight, but I should be helping him to get up to my level instead of letting him stay there and just stay weak. And so I think that's a good way of understanding that. Thank you. I get it clearly now.
I think it's because Chunseok doesn't have a mic, but
he's silenced.
Yeah.
I have silenced
we should
him.
talk about that.
About what? PRs
in every single lift. Let's see who has the higher PR. Let's start from bench.
I don't.
What is your PR?
I don't remember anymore.
I believe it was 190 pounds. And Chunseok's is 365. Was it 365 or 385? 375.
Oh, when was he here all of a sudden?
And let's go with squat. I believe yours was 190 pounds.
Very even keeled.
Chunseok's was at least, 465? Or 435, something like that.
I don't think the numbers are really important. I think what's important is the general principle that you taught us, and I thank you for that. And I hope Chunseok can learn from that as well.
Oh, Sam's not even in the 600 club.
Yeah, that would be rough.
Your deadlift's 190.
So there was something that I wanted to talk about, but I'm going to forego it right now because it depends. We need a full episode on veganism. There's a lot to talk about there. But what I can bring up is cocaine. There was cocaine found in the White House.
I don't know. We're recording on Friday afternoon, early afternoon. And as of right now, I heard that the latest development on the story is that the Republican House is launching an investigation into the cocaine found in the White House. I can tell you what it shows. I don't know whose it was. We just know it was around where the cubby section was, where they put away their cell phones and stuff. And so it wasn't in the residential section. It was in a place where a lot of staffers go. So if you went to a secure meeting, you'd have to put your cell phone in a cubby and things like that. And so it was found in that area during a like a sweep of the White House, what they normally do. That's what I've heard or read. But what I do know that is disturbing is that the White House isn't launching an investigation on their own, which is
not.
No, which is crazy.
Sus.
If it was any other illegal substance, you would.
Right.
So they're hiding something. And I know a lot of people are pointing at Hunter Biden because he has a history of using cocaine. And, you know, there was some footage a few days prior to this where he looked very much like he was high on the White House balcony. But, you know, again, that's speculation. I don't know if I entertain it too much. I just do know that if you're not going to launch an investigation, it really casts doubt on just, you know, all the things that they say they would be. They said, you know, we would be the most transparent White House administration in the world. This is obviously not true. Maybe the most non-transparent White House in the world is more true. So how can you say something and be the complete opposite? Obviously, this is a big disappointment to many people.
Right.
But then, you know, I would imagine that this is somewhat of a partisan issue. So if you're a Democrat, you don't really care. If you're a Republican, then you see the hypocrisy or the double standard that's being placed. Because if it was any other White House admin, Democrats would have been crazy, going nuts, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it could be partisan. There is obviously some partisan play, but I think more importantly, it is the kind of model that this admin is showing, not just to this nation, but to the world, that they find this illegal substance, this very dangerous substance. Cocaine isn't just like candy. It's a dangerous substance and you're not taking it seriously when you're supposed to be someone that's supposed to be taken seriously. You don't take what you said you would take seriously. So it's unfortunate. And it's just like another notch on one of those things that you could be disappointed about, I suppose.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it was just something that's been circulating our news cycle, and I just wanted to hear your thoughts on it. Because like you said, people are just jumping on, oh, it's Hunter. But, you know, I just wanted to just kind of see what your thoughts were. Speaking of the White House, I did want to talk about veganism, and we'll get to that next week because I think there's a lot to unpack there with veganism. Like, you know, what's so wrong about it? Why do you hate it? Is it a sin to be a vegan? Is it a sin to be a pescatarian versus a vegetarian? Is it a sin? Is it wrong? We'll be talking about all those
I feel like
different
Sam
things.
has some strong emotions on this topic already.
I'm just very We thank you for listening to this episode of the Dear Church podcast. Join us next week as we discuss veganism. So tune in next week to find out. We hope and pray that this has been a blessing in your ears. Fight the good fight, finish the race, keep the faith.
Peace.